Hello, everybody. Modern Armenia is facing a massive challenge, and just as this challenge is that, in order to have a prosperous future, Armenia needs to overcome its past and appreciate the realities enveloping its present situation. This effectively means that Armenia should pursue the line of achieving a peace deal with Azerbaijan and normalization with Turkey. How doable is this? What are the constraints? And today I will discuss this issue and many other related issues with my guest, Dr. Maxime Gauin, French historian and a researcher from the Institute of Diplomacy and Development. Dr. Gauin, it's a great delight to welcome you here. Welcome to Caliber.
Thank you.
And my first question is going to be very basic. To what extent do you think Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is pulling strings in Armenia? To what extent he is actually in charge of the country?
Complicated question, basic, fundamental, but complicated question. I would say he is increasingly in charge, but definitely not as much as Mr. Aliyev, for example, is in charge of Azerbaijan. During the last 2 years, he has reinforced slowly his authority on the state and the country. After President Armen Sarkisian resigned, he felt more free to appoint who he wants in the top administration. He changed the chief of staff of the Armenian army, which was more than needed. More recently, this year, he changed the deputy chief of staff and 9 other top officers of the Armenian army after the unpleasant incident at the border, which was provoked not by regular soldiers, actually, but by members of an association of veterans.
Karabakh.
Exactly. Yeah. Which was established in 1983 and which seems to be divided since 15 years, but with a strong nationalist component, pro-Russian, pro-Iranian component, of course. So it could be a deliberate provocation in order to undermine the peace process, and his reaction to open a probe, an investigation at least, and to remove officers, I think is a very positive element. That having been said, he has some issues. I will give you the most striking example. In 2022, he went to Paris, and members of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation hurled eggs and tomatoes on his cars, used insult I will not translate in front of a camera. And a part of these persons have been welcomed by the Armenian ambassador in Paris the same day. If something similar happened to Mr. Aliyev anywhere, it's of course unthinkable that these people will be welcomed in the Azerbaijani embassy. But the core of the issue is not that this happened. The core of the issue is, after almost 2 years, this ambassador is still in charge. This ambassador is still in Paris, because unfortunately, Mr. Pashinyan and his government are sorely lacking of people who are both loyal and experienced. They are looking for 2 years or maybe even more for a diplomat who speaks French as much as the current ambassador, who has something looking like a network in Paris, but who is in favor of their peace policy. We can only observe that they did not find such a person for now. And what happens, I mean, this is an extreme example, but there are other problems in the diplomacy and to a lesser extent in the military.
So let's talk about the power dynamics within Armenia. So we've got Pashinyan and his team, his administration. We have church on the other side and reverentialist sentiments. What is the political cloud of those political forces who are currently counteracting Pashinyan's plans?
If we speak about purely political forces, it's the previous regime, it's the previous Kocharian Sarkisian.
But political force, I also meant church as well.
And I would like to mention the church as well, because as you know, in Armenia, the church has a special situation. In practice, it is a state church. It's not called like that, but in practice, they have a right to intervene in the school programs, which even the Catholic Church in Poland has no right currently. So it has an exceptional position among the members of the Council of Europe, let's say. And historically, I mean, the Armenian Church is linked to Russia, is linked to Armenian nationalists. It took time to be so, because there were priests and even some patriarchs who were assaulted by Armenian nationalists. But now, currently, during the last decades, the last century, it is one of the main forces of Armenian nationalism in Armenia and in the diaspora. So it is a problem for Nikol Pashinyan. It's one of the challenges he is facing. That having been said, even if Armenia remains a strongly religious country, even if national identity is closely linked with the church, we should make a difference between the faith and trusting the churchmen for political issues. To give you some figures, 10% only of the population comes to the church every week, but 45% pray every day, according to a survey of 2017. So there is a gap between those who believe and those who come to the church on a very regular basis. And I think one of the reasons is the fact that the churchmen, especially the top churchmen, have largely discredited themselves by corruption, which is, as you know, an endemic problem in Armenia, and by excessively political and nationalist statements. And that's why, in spite of the importance of the church in Armenia, the number of demonstrators is not impressive, even for the standards of Armenia. This is a problem, but this is not, for now at least, it's not a major challenge. And one thing I would like to add, maybe the scariest part is the fact that MP Pashinyan is taking part of this demonstration. To remind the spectators, MP Pashinyan assassinated the Turkish Consul General in Los Angeles in January 1982. He was sentenced to lifetime imprisonment. He was released in very questionable circumstances in 2021, and he, even more questionably, he was expelled to Armenia in spite of the fact that he is a Lebanese citizen. And the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, his party, is regularly using him to scare Nikol Pashinyan, because he spent almost 40 years in jail by royalty for his party, so he would not mind to spend the rest of his life in jail if needed. That having been said, if I know it, obviously the Armenian police know it even better and knows what he is doing, so I assume that they are monitoring him as necessary. But this remains a problem.
And regarding the latest protests in Armenia, demonstrations, which is effectively, all of them cumulatively, may be described as a reaction to latest developments on the conditional border between Azerbaijan and Armenia. As you know, 4 adjacent villages, decision has been made, they will be returned to Azerbaijan. How do you evaluate the scope of those demonstrations? From outside, as an external observer, to me they look incredibly trivial, not so trivial, but very limited in their ability to do anything in terms of positive action. What is your reflection on that?
I have a similar appraisal in the sense that the accumulation of military and political defeat for the hardliners made them kind of clueless. They don't know what to do. They did not expect the defeat of 2020, of 21, 22, 23. And their main godfather, namely Russia, is weakened by the war in Ukraine, by the huge material and human losses, by the international sanctions. And Iran, which is a historical partner of Armenian nationalism, is not in a very good economic and military shape currently because of the sanctions, because of the fight with Israel, and so on. So they lack of internal power and they lack of external support. And this is something unprecedented for them, historically speaking. So they protest, of course, because...
And they have no clear aim, as I understand.
They would like to overthrow Nikol Pashinyan, but they failed to do it by the demonstration of 2022. They observed that not sufficiently persons will join them. Nikol Pashinyan took some precautions for his security. Now his personal security is largely secured by a private military company, American private military company, which was named Blackwater in the past. So there are precautions and they don't know what to do. In 1989, when the Armenian Prime Minister has realized that he was wrong, that time was not playing for Armenia but for Azerbaijan, when he had the design to give back at least a part of the occupied territory, they killed him, but this is not possible anymore currently. So they are kind of lost.
They're kind of lost, and they have no particular aim. Actually, they want to disrupt the process, but they don't have end game, as I understand from what you have said. And does the fact that those revanchist segments within Armenian society and church that cannot induce any upheaval against Pashinyan, does this mean that Armenian society at large is slowly coming to terms with the realities on the ground, and they are more or less ready for that ultimate eventuality, which is going to be Azerbaijan-Armenian peace deal? Could we interpret this in this fashion?
I agree. For a series of reasons. I mean, even before the Azerbaijani victory of 2020, there was according to the Armenian nationalists themselves, according to people who deplored this situation publicly, there was an increasing distrust between Armenians of Armenia, especially from Yerevan, and the clan from Karabakh, who in practice confiscated power, not just in occupied Karabakh, but also in Armenia. And the level of corruption was huge, even for the standard of Armenia. Of course, after the defeat, it was very strong proof that the strongest side was Azerbaijan, not Armenia anymore. And then the clashes at the conditional boundary in 2021 and 22, and the liberation of Khankendi. All that proved that to a majority of Armenians that there were rights to re-elect Nikol Pashinyan in 2021, that revanchism is kind of suicidal for Armenia, and they will take much more economic profit in becoming a transit country for Central Asia, Eastern Asia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and European Union, instead of playing the role between Armenia and Azerbaijan at the benefit of Iran and Russia. There is no majority which understand that. And even among the supporters of the opposition, there is not a strong will to go to the street and to try something, because they realize it's kind of lost cause. And I think the clashes at the boundary in 2022 were an important turning point or an important confirmation of this trend, in the sense that Armenia saw Russia will not intervene on their behalf. The signature of the Prague Declaration with the mutual recognition of the territorial integrity was an achievement, not yet the peace treaty, but a step towards the peace treaty. Correspondingly, after the liberation of Khankendi, there was a fear that Armenians from Karabakh could attack Nikol Pashinyan, but actually, during the last months, we saw that the overwhelming majority of them are much angrier against their previous leadership than against Nikol Pashinyan. I heard from some contacts I have in Yerevan that the dominant opinion among the Karabakh Armenian who went to Armenia is our previous leaders, they can die in Azerbaijani prisons. This is all what they deserve.
That's quite fascinating, because there's a massive, not a massive international pressure, but there's some pressure on Azerbaijan to release those former separatist leaders. And those people do not command the confidence of many Karabakh Armenians who are currently in Armenia. So it's a very interesting observation. And back to the point about the peace treaty negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia, President Ilham Aliyev recently stated that we are very close to that ultimate eventuality. Pashinyan expressed some positive views as well. What is the likelihood that by the end of the year, by end of 2024, these two countries will be able to sign some form of basic peace treaty, which will put an end to this stage of the peace process and begin the new stage?
I think it's very likely. I mean, both leaders made announcements in that sense, which are, as far as I know, unprecedented. I never heard them being so optimistic. And besides the statement, if we look at the situation on the ground, I mean, the issue of Karabakh is no more. It's completely liberated, and not just in terms of military. As I mentioned 2 minutes before, even most of the Karabakh Armenians who are currently in Armenia, they don't dream about attacking Azerbaijan again. They are angry primarily against their leadership, who was utterly incompetent and counterproductive. So the fear of Nikol Pashinyan is decreasing. It does not disappear for very good reasons, but it is decreasing. It's not anymore what it used to be even 1 year ago. And the external forces who have interest in preventing the peace treaty are weakened. As I mentioned, Russia and Iran are weakened. And Nikol Pashinyan feels more comfortable. He can explain, I mean, it was visible in his project of roads across Armenia. Yeah. I understand that it does not fit exactly what Azerbaijan expects, but no, we left conflict. We are just negotiating what is the best for two sides. It's something different. And as Mr. Aliyev said, we agree on the principles. Now we are discussing about the details. which is perfectly normal, which is perfectly legitimate. It always happens in such conditions. So we have advanced a lot on this issue, and Mr. Pashinyan can tell his people our economy will be so much better after the peace treaty. Our national interest is to become a transit country, which is basically true.
And of course, we talk about the probability of a peace treaty being signed by the end of the year, but there's also certain possibility of a new war as well. Lots of people are talking about it. If you remember, after September 2023, when Azerbaijan fully restored its sovereignty over Karabakh, in the Western media, in the French media, American media, there's been a speculation that Azerbaijan will attack the southern Armenia, Zengezur, which is Sunni province of Armenia, and nothing has come out of that prediction.
Yes.
There was only one tiny, well, not tiny, but quite a escalation in February, if you remember,
Yeah,
the 12th and 13th
I
of
mentioned this
February.
incident.
You referred to that. But apart from that, the circumstances surrounding the conditional border, they've been pretty stable. How do you evaluate this possibility that there could be another war?
With the current governments, both in Azerbaijan and Armenia, I don't see any possibility. And I mean, in Azerbaijan, the risk of overthrow of the government is equal to 0, and in Armenia, it is decreasing. So I don't think it is likely. We are much closer to a peace treaty than to a new war.
To a new war. And quite often, European diplomats from the European Union, voicing the opinion that Nikol Pashinyan is doing something very important in his own country. He changed Armenia considerably over the past couple of years. But President Aliyev is not doing enough to make his life easier. Azerbaijan is not doing enough to make the life of Nikol Pashinyan easier. What do they mean, do you think? And to what extent do you think this argument has a certain degree of validity? What do you make of it?
I think on two sides, I mean, Baku and Brussels, Paris, Berlin, etc., two sides see half of the reality. Military reconquest was needed to liberate Karabakh in 2020-2023 for reasons you already know. And after the provocation by some elements of the Armenian army 2021-2022, it was only natural to react with strength. And maybe in Brussels, Paris, Berlin, it's not understood as much as it should be, especially for the post-2020 events. But I would like to argue that strength only is not enough. Softness, concrete promise are needed as well. When Mr. Aliyev says that Armenia will take economic profit of that, will have the gas it needs, which means you will not depend on Russia and Iran anymore, this is something positive, this is something to emphasize. Clearly, because it is in the interest of Armenia and Azerbaijan, and of the peace treaty, of course. What the European diplomats mean is that every sentence should be more carefully calculated in order to avoid any distortion by the Armenian opposition. For example, when your government says the refugees must return, this is more than legitimate.
We talk about the concept of Western Azerbaijan.
Yes, but the wording Western Azerbaijan, I would like to say, is more appropriate for a historical symposium to women, because this is a historical reality that current Armenia had 80% of Muslim population, mostly Azerbaijani, at the beginning of 19th century, before the Russian conquest and before the Russian policy of replacement of population. But when you say that in a political context, even if you emphasize what Mr. Aliyev says, that it is not about theoretical claims, this is just about historical reality, you take the risk that Armenian extremists cut some seconds and say to their voters, oh, Azerbaijan wants Zangezur, wants Sevan, and one day they will even take Yerevan. That's, I think, what the European diplomats have in mind, and to some extent it's true.
I see. So talking about the peace deal negotiations, of course, it's a bilateral process. It has been bilateral since last year. Mm-hmm. And I think that the spirit of that 7th of December joint declaration is still with us. Mm-hmm. We have seen some manifestations of it during April. But there are some other complex issues regarding Armenia's constitution. So we know that in their constitution, the preamble, there's a reference to the 1990 Declaration of Independence, and there's reference in that document to 1989 decision, which is widely known as a Miatsum decision. And that needs to be changed, of course. And Armenia claims that it's their internal affair, their constitution. To make those changes possible, they need to have referendum. And the question here is that, could Azerbaijan and Armenia sign a peace deal before those changes being made? My understanding is that Azerbaijan wants those changes to happen before the peace deal, and those changes could happen through referendum. And to win that referendum, Pashinyan needs to mobilize the population. 25% of the eligible vote need to vote in favor of that. And of course, ultimately, it should be 50 plus. And if he loses that referendum, his situation will be very complicated. How insurmountable is this challenge for Armenia to get rid of that Miatsum provision? And also that referendum is not just about that particular issue, but also about a wide range of reforms, including the curbing the influence of the Armenian church. How insurmountable is that challenge, you think?
It's an important challenge, and that's why I think it is very useful to speak, from Azerbaijan perspective, to speak about the benefits of Armenia from peace, to declare that the peace is in the interest of everyone. For a very poor country like Armenia, and even more in a sense for the refugees, I mean, self-inflicted refugees. I mean, it was not Azerbaijan who expelled them, of course, but they are refugees in practice. From Karabakh to Armenia, who are even poorer than the average.
Azerbaijan questions the term refugee on the basis of the fact that those Armenians were actually Armenian citizens. They can't be refugees in their own country. But I understand what you mean by refugee. Yes. Please.
To simplify,
Yeah.
simplify. Who are even poorer than the average. The economic argument, I think, is the strongest. And when you read the press of the extremists in the Armenian diaspora, they are very concerned by the efficiency of the economic argument, because they know they have nothing to offer. They know for decades they promise billions of investment, prosperity, etc. We will bring our money, we will bring money of the European and American taxpayers. They did not bring anything looking like a profitable investment. So they know economy is their weakest point in front of the Armenian public opinion, including Armenians from Karabakh. So this is, I think, the interest of Azerbaijan, not just of Armenia, to emphasize the benefit for ordinary Armenians, and to mention, as Mr. Aliyev did, the fact that Azerbaijan can provide gas to Armenians, because currently the gas comes from Iran and Russia. As I mentioned, their government, so people, it's of course a different thing, but their government, they are not happy to see peace in the South Caucasus, and still less peace at the conditions which have been agreed between Mr. Pashinyan and Mr. Aliyev. If these arguments is emphasized both by Mr. Pashinyan and Mr. Aliyev, there will be a majority to vote. But of course, the exact schedule, the exact calendar should be decided carefully to bring the referendum and the peace treaty closer, maybe to sign the political declaration before the referendum, to announce that we have the intent to sign a peace treaty which will look like that, as soon as the change of the Armenian Constitution will make such a peace treaty feasible. Because you may remember the Zurich agreement between Turkey and Russia was not perfect, but it had some it was all the positive elements were cancelled by the Armenian Constitutional Court on the basis of the current constitution. So with a certain effort of pedagogy, I dare to think that there will be more than 25% of the total registered voters in Armenia, and more than 50% of the voters who will actually come to the ballot able to vote for such constitutional changes.
And what about Armenia's challenge to reduce the Russian element within its own sovereign borders? Of course, Azerbaijan and Armenian peace deal will make Armenia a better country. It will be far more independent, and there will be the concomitant process of normalization with Turkey. But I want to specifically ask about this Nikol Pashinyan's steps to sort of reduce Russian element within its own sovereign borders. Do you think he's successful? Because he has done absolutely nothing in the direction of the Eurasian Economic Union, because the economies are very much integrated into one whole. And it does not seem to be within the interest of Armenia to leave that economic alliance. But the CSTO is a different issue. Do you think he will take some radical steps?
He
started, but is he approaching the red lines of Russia, or you think he has already approached the red lines of Russia?
Considering the reactions from Russia, I mean, not just Mr. Putin, but also Mrs. Margarita Simonian, who advised him to hang himself at a tree in September 2023 in the context of the liberation of Frankendi. Yes, I think he has crossed the red line. But to give you a tangible example, in February of this year, it was announced that the bank of Ruben Vardanyan will be sold to an Anglo-Georgian bank. And the price is something like 10% of the assets of the bank. So this is a clear way to reduce the dependency of the Armenian economy on Russians. This is not the whole thing, but this is a significant step. Moreover, considering the decline of the Russian economy, considering basically what they call the increase of the gross national product is just an increase of military orders, which are immediately destroyed by the Ukrainian army with Western weapons. Russia is less and less interesting for Armenia. Iran is not a very prosperous country, so I don't think it's an obstacle they cannot bypass. I think it's possible. It is difficult. They must act step by step. They start acting in this direction. But, and one more time, the main issue is energy. And as soon as Azerbaijan promise that you will have the gas you need, you will have whatever you need. And I think Turkey is also making some less official statement of this kind.
The reason why I mentioned this dependence on Russia, because Eurasian Economic Union is not the future of the world. We all understand it, of course, but European Union is a long-term prospect for Armenia, and there will be a long process fraught with frictions and so on. We could imagine it. So the reason why I asked this question, because currently Armenian economy is very much integrated to the Eurasian Economic Union, and their growth in economy is largely attributable to that economic alliance. So it will be incredibly difficult to get rid of that sort of membership in that organization. And I'm not entirely sure to what extent Armenia needs it now. My feeling has always been that they need to have good relations both with Europe and Eurasian Economic Alliance to be able to navigate between these two spaces. And probably that's what they have been doing for the past years very successfully. And the necessity to get rid of Russian dependency will bring about many challenges for them.
Definitely, it will bring challenges, but you know about the growth of Azerbaijani economy. Turkey has some problems, but Turkey has kept its industries intact. It's mostly about the value of the Turkish lira on international markets, but the real economy of Turkey is not in a bad shape. Yeah. So, and Armenia is a small and poor country, so to replace the Russian investment by Turkic investment, it will not be immensely difficult.
On the 5th of April, Armenian Prime Minister met Ursula von der Leyen and Antony Blinken in Brussels, and also Josep Borrell. To what extent do you think today, as of today, Azerbaijan should be worried about the possibility of the Western support received by Armenia to be used against Azerbaijan in the context of Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process?
I mean, these concerns were understandable kind of 1 year ago. I would not say the same thing today because the Western support, which is mostly verbal support actually, for Armenia never was so strong. But as we discussed during the last 6 months, the bilateral relations never were so productive between Yerevan and Azerbaijan for the reason we mentioned. So with Western support, no matter what the errors are, because there are definitely errors of communication, not just from France, but also from Brussels, Germany, and even more the United States, no matter what these errors are, the effects are positive. what Azerbaijan could fear was that Nikol Pashinyan does not want to discuss not just in a more comfortable position, but in a stronger position. But it did not happen. He is just more comfortable to sign peace. He is giving back 4 villages to Azerbaijan, which will be the very first villages liberated without firing a single shot. Yes. So the concrete results of this support are very promising and very good for Azerbaijan.
Yeah, and many Western diplomats told me that if Armenia decides to use that support against Azerbaijan, that would be a big mistake. And so far, you think they have not made that big mistake?
No, and to reach the most tangible thing, I told that to some of your colleagues. France sold only 160 rifles to Armenia, which is in itself negligible by comparison with the firepower of your army. And on purpose, the company which signed the contract with Armenia did not sell the model for army, they sell the model for police.
Yes.
Which is in itself interesting. But if we go a little bit more into the details, this rifle fires 7.62 millimeters ammunition, which is stopped by the armors of the infantry armored vehicle of the Azerbaijani army. While the model for the military of the same French company fires 12.7 millimeters ammunition, which pierce the armors of your armored infantry vehicle. So with what we sold to Armenia, you cannot stop an Azerbaijani infantry vehicle, and with what we did not sell to Armenia, you can stop such a vehicle. Obviously, it was on purpose. And a similar way, the 3 radars sold to Armenia, only 2 arrived, which is in itself very small. Even more if you think about the 19 radars they lost during the 2020 wars and the more recent clashes. These radars were sold without missiles. And NATO standard radars with Russian or even more Soviet missiles, it's like putting the electronic of a Renault on a Lada of 1980s without changing the motors. It's not compatible, it's impossible. So it's just to make sure that Mr. Pashinyan will be able to say, it does not matter if we lose Russia. We don't need Russia. It's all for public relations, and it worked well.
And on the 10th of May, Azerbaijan and Armenian foreign ministers will meet in Kazakhstan.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a bilateral meeting. And one of the issues to be discussed is the Zangezur corridor. In other words, this overland passage connecting mainland Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan exclave. President Aliyev recently, whilst delivering a speech at ADA, said that international sort of regime is also possible. He referred to international contingent or international control. How do you see the future of the Zangezur corridor discourse between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Of course, we are at the core of the shared interest, because very legitimately Azerbaijan wants a communication toward the rest of its territory, which is Nakhchivan. There are similar agreements for enclaves in the world, like the Spanish enclave in France, for example. There are enclaves between states of the Arabic Peninsula, and all of them found a way to have a special road to connect the enclave to the main territory of the country. This is for the Azerbaijani demands. And for Armenia itself, one more time, its future, its bright future, is to be a transit country. And the Zangezur corridor is, of course, one of the main elements of this transit country. What Mr. Aliyev says, if I'm not wrong, is a change by comparison with the initial plan, which was about Russian control. And I think it's a very positive change. I assume the two governments will decide about who will control which nationalities will be in charge of controlling this road.
So, I'm sorry, I think President Aliyev still emphasized the importance of Article 9 of the 10 November Declaration. He said that according
of course,
he said
this is a legal basis, right?
It's a current legal position, but he also said that if Armenia does not want to give that control to Russia, then perhaps he somewhat hinted at the possibility of some different regime applicable to their roads. So please carry on.
Yes. And I mean, Heydar Aliyev, when he was the president of independent Azerbaijan, always refused the Russian proposals to control the boundary between Azerbaijan and Iran. All agree that this was a very wise choice. And nobody in Azerbaijan can blame Mr. Pashinyan for reaching the same conclusion that Heydar Aliyev. He reached the same conclusion later, okay, but he's reaching the same conclusion.
The Pashinyan's reality is that Iranian-Armenian border is controlled by Russians today. The interstate border, Armenian-Turkish border, is also controlled by Russians, but he does not want to give that new element of control to Russia along the Zangezur Passage.
Absolutely, and actually this control is diminishing because FSB officers at the airport of Yerevan will leave.
Sorry for butting in. Do you think they will actually leave on the 1st of August?
Only the future will tell us, but I think they will leave soon or late because they have no choice. I mean, just to give you a double example. In 2020, at the very end of the war, as you know, your army shot down a Russian helicopter, and it was one of the bases for the strong Russian intervention, much stronger than before. During the liberation of Khankendi, Russian soldiers were killed again by your army, and Mr. Putin was satisfied by a simple phone call. The weakening of Russia is a blessing for the region. It's sad for the ordinary Russians who did not want this policy and who are suffering of that, but for South Caucasian, it's a blessing. So what will do Mr. Putin? He will invade Georgia with soldiers he does not have, and invade Armenia, facing the risk to fight Azerbaijani and Turkish armies? I don't think so. He will use an opposition we already discussed, how weak it is? I don't think so. So maybe he will obtain the postponing, but I hardly see how he can prevent Armenia to be sovereign on its own territory.
Russian peacekeepers are currently leaving Azerbaijan. They practically have left the Azerbaijani territory. Let's say in early 2024, just 2 months before their early withdrawal, had you anticipated this development to take place so soon?
I was not surprised, actually. I was not surprised. I mean, after the liberation of Khankendi, I understood it was a question of time. I did not evaluate how much time it will take, but I was not surprised it was just about months, because their mission was pointless.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are slowly coming to the end of our conversation. I deliberately, during our chat, did not refer to French-Azerbaijani relations. They're very problematic. There are different views about them. But just one very simple question at the very end. American ambassador recently visited Shusha, and amongst the former OSCE co-chairs, France is the only country who has not yet sent its ambassador to Shusha. What does this signify, and do you think something will change in that regard very soon?
I think efforts must be done by every person involved in this issue. But if I may say, as far as I know, the American schools in Baku and the Russian schools in Baku are still here, while the funding for the French school in Baku has been cut.
I don't know the circumstances enveloping that particular case. If you know, please share with us.
I just know that the funding has been cut and that the very existence of the school, not the university, which is something different, but the school is threatened. And the ambassador was recalled in Paris because of that. Now she is back, which is in itself positive because it was a short recall. But this is one of the element of context of this non-visit, and she went to Agdam before.
Yeah, Shusha has got a special meaning.
As a special important, I know.
Yes. Okay. Dr. Gauin, thank you very much indeed for this lovely conversation.
Thank you very much.
It was very enlightening, and I wish you all the best.
You too.